Tsar Nicholas I sent 100,000 Russian troops to crush the Hungarians.
Wow.
The prime minister that Franz Josef had at the time complained, "Oh gosh, now we'll owe the Tsar." And Franz Josef's response was, "We shall astound him with our ingratitude."
Ingratitude.
And he does later on.
I'll have to remember that.
We shall astound him with our ingratitude. Tsar Nicholas thought that he had Franz Josef as a friend. He was wrong. He did. The Croatian nobles thought because they had served the Habsburgs well in crushing the Venetians, that they would now replace the Hungarians as the partners in this endeavor. They were wrong. And that, of course, created bitterness in them. And all of this happened at a time when Croatians and Serbians were becoming more conscious of themselves, when nationalism was growing in what was becoming their middle class. Their languages were becoming written languages, and they were becoming proud of that sort of thing. Franz Josef missed an opportunity to do something with his Croatians at the time. All of this lent itself to the Russians, of course, who could now exploit all of the, at least they thought it lent themselves to them. And of course they were focused now on the South Slavs and all their aspirations. Now again, South Slavs are the Slovenes, who are a quiet group. Okay? There was no revolution in 1848 in any of the Slavic territories at all. They tended to be very, very tame. The Croatians, the Serbians, the Bulgarians are part of this, but I don't want to talk about them too much. There's too much of a story there. The Italian thing wasn't over. This is the king, Victor Emmanuel of Sardinia, and this is the prime minister, Camillo Cavour, one of the cleverer people I have ever run into in history, who would work not harmoniously with Giuseppe Garibaldi, who was a firebrand revolutionary, had helped Simón Bolívar in his military campaigns in much of South America to launch what would be the final campaigns, as it were, to unify Italy. But they did it with the help, ironically, of the guy that had crushed their last attempt at this sort of thing. Now, how do you do this sort of thing? What you do is you get your tiny little state of Piedmont, Sardinia, involved in something called the Crimean War. The Russians, who were hell-bent on control, let's get this one here, on control of the Straits, thought that they could pull it off because they thought they had a friend in the Habsburg Emperor. And so, in putting pressure upon the Ottoman Turks, they thought they could move in for the kill, but what Franz Josef did instead was send his army to occupy that blue territory, the Danubian principalities, we know that as Romania now, and to prevent the Russian armies from traversing overland. It really pissed off the Tsar. He was astounded by that ingratitude. The Prussians, who were already sort of eyeing the Habsburgs as people they wanted to push aside to unify Germany, stayed neutral very cleverly during this time because they would later want the Tsar on their side. It was the British and the French who declared war on Russia, along with the Turks, and the only place they could find a fighter was in the Crimean Peninsula, which why it has its name. But little Piedmont, Sardinia declared war on Russia. Good Lord, what could that be about? It's because you want to be at the peace table with the winners. And in the treaty that ended this, the Russians were temporarily, for about 20 years, set back. The Italians, though, because of this, were able to rope Napoleon into doing all their fighting for them. It was Napoleon III's armies that defeated the Habsburgs and grabbed Lombardy for Piedmont, Sardinia, and it was Victor Emmanuel's armies that swept through the north, while Garibaldi's armies swept through Sicily in the south, and they didn't like each other, Garibaldi and the king. They had a secret meeting in a farmhouse. We to this day don't know what they talked about. But when they came out, Garibaldi had pledged his allegiance to a monarchy, which surprised everybody. And the Italian kingdom was born, except they didn't have Rome yet. French troops were there, and they don't have Venezia yet. But the Italians now began playing with this guy, Otto von Bismarck. Very weak country, getting everybody else to do their fighting for them. So when Bismarck beat up the Austrians as he was unifying Germany in the Austro-Prussian War, That was when they grabbed Venice. And then when Bismarck beat up Napoleon III in the Franco-Prussian War, also as part of his unification effort, that's when they grabbed Rome. So Italy is unified, with Venice as part of it, as a result of this way in which they are able to play off the great powers, which now left the Habsburgs with this. Those are all the nationalities. And it's at this point, most of you are aware, if you've taken any history courses, that ultimately something called Austria-Hungary came into existence. What do you do when you're down to just your Hungarians and your Germans as the basis of your empire? You hyphenate it. Now, in the long run, this was one of the more unworkable arrangements ever imagined. Okay? The Austria-Hungary came into existence, the Ausgleich, that means compromise, in 1867. I want you to notice something here, though. The Croatians get a real raw deal. That blue line is the line between the Austrian side and the Hungarian side. Dalmatia ends up on the Austrian side, but the rest of the Croatian lands end up in the Hungarian side. Which drove home to them that they were very junior partners of not the Austrians, but the Hungarians, who had mistreated them rather badly. It's also during this time that the Hungarians, that the Austrians get this idea that we should probably grab Bosnia, like they didn't have enough complexity on their hands. This Austro-Hungarian thing was very complex, but the South Slavic peoples, all the Slavic peoples, were very unhappy with it. Essentially, the Hungarians were the most brutal of them all. While the Austrians, on their side, had a parliament that eventually gave the right to vote to all men, no matter what their ethnicity, although it was a parliament with no power. On the Hungarian side, only Hungarian men of certain wealth could vote. Not even Croatian nobles could vote in their system, in their constitution. 2 prime ministers, 2 parliaments, 1 army. Not a very good army, as it turns out, in the First World War. The Russians eventually recovered from their setbacks, and by now they actually do very much dislike the Austrians, especially over the Bosnian thing. It really irritated them when they moved into that territory. I don't want to absolve the others of responsibility, but the Russians do bear a great deal of responsibility for what was the instability of the Balkans at the time. We see the gradual retreat of the Turks. We see the great powers moving in on these territories, trying either through client states or directly to control them. The Russo-Turkish War of 1877 looks like a big Russian victory. They want to create a huge Bulgaria. It would look like that. Nobody else liked that idea, which is what led Bismarck to create something called the Congress of Berlin, that basically said, nope, you can't have a Bulgaria that big. Gave the Turks a little bit more of a lease on life. There's Bosnia there, which is adjacent to Dalmatia. You can see Montenegro now. Not quite independent, but functioning as an independent city. The Bulgarians were restrained, the Russians were restrained. Bismarck was actually being sensible. There was too much rapid change going on that could get out of hand. Unfortunately, a later Kaiser wouldn't understand his notion of limits at all. This guy here is kind of interesting. You've all heard of him, I'm sure, the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, Franz Ferdinand, who was assassinated in 1914. It was his idea to redivide the Austro-Hungarian Empire so there would be a South Slav kingdom of Slovenes, and Croatians, and Serbs, and others. The Hungarians hated that idea. It tended to demote them, so to speak, if there was a redivision of all of that. So the Hungarians sort of had something in common with the Serbs, who also didn't want to see such a thing. They didn't want want to see it because what they wanted to do was expand into those territories to take Bosnia, to control the Croats and that sort of thing. So what we have here is a very incendiary situation. There was not one but two Balkan wars in 1913 and 1914. The first Balkan War drove the Turks back to just the territory around Constantinople, but it had created a large Bulgaria, which of course nobody likes. So the second Balkan War was everybody beat up Bulgaria and pushed it back, and it's the Serbs that emerged as the winners there. But of course, at just the moment when things in Bosnia were starting to heat up quite a bit, the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand on the 28th of June 1914 by a Serbian student, Gavrilo Princip, is commonly looked at as a key. It's kind of like the storming of the Bastille. It's too simplistic to say this started the First World War, but it's sort of where the sequence of events began. Now the key here, the reason I have him there, Gavrilo Princip was a member of the Black Hand Serbian terrorist organization. The gun and money he had been provided by the Serbian Army High Command. They had gotten the money from the Russian Army High Command, who were subsidizing terrorist operations against Habsburg officials during that time. So this issue of the complicity of Russian intervention is very important. And so we end up with the First World War. And then it ends. But it ends in the Austrian sense with massive rebellions of ethnic groups. And there you can see the different groups that would ultimately want to separate themselves. During the war, the Italians who joined the Allies had been promised a great deal, including Dalmatia, the Adriatic coastline, Treaty of London, 1915. The problem is that an awful lot of that had also been promised by the same Allies in 1915 to the Serbs. This was what they had been promised during that time. Of course, the collapse of the empires had a kind of chaos to it, and whatever you promised in London isn't necessarily going to happen. And let's see if I can get back here. What we do end up with eventually is the Croatian National Council, which formed in the midst of the revolutions, along with the Slovene National Council, which seems now to understand that they are Slovenes, announced that they wanted to be joined in a single South Slavic state with Serbia, which was more than Serbia had been promised in London. The name of this outfit, when it is endorsed by the Treaty of Versailles, is usually Yugoslavia, although the name Yugoslavia doesn't appear until 1929. It literally means land of the South Slavs. It was called the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, which if you were Montenegrin, which was, you were part of it as well, or Hungarian, or whatever is a Bosnian, wouldn't quite describe you. Those are the ethnic groups of the thing called Yugoslavia. One of the great bad ideas of the 20th century. Very unstable. From the very beginning, it was economically problematic in terms of the way in which the economies had functioned formally. Cut off, as it were, from previous markets, even cut off the Dalmatian lands from outside territories. This is a time of economic nationalism, dare I say the word tariffs. Not trading with people in the outside world, which if you're a Dalmatian city is not quite the way it's been for the previous 3,000 years. Okay?
So whose idea was it for them to, and, I mean, who gave it that name, Yugoslavia? Where did?
Well, it was a common word, land of the South Slavs,
Okay.
but it was the king, Alexander was his name, in 1929 changed his name.
Okay, but some of them wanted it.
Yeah.
Some of them wanted that.
Yeah, at first.
Unification.
At first they did.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things you get is you're not part of the defeated power thing.
Right.
So that would have been a motive.
Right.
I mean, the Alsatians had the same thing. They were
Right.
part of a defeated power
Right.
once they were separated. like almost all of the other Eastern European successor states that were created by the Treaty of Versailles, by the time the Great Depression came after 1929 and 1930, its king, Alexander, the one that gave us the name Yugoslavia, had actually established a kind of Italian-style, ironically, semi-fascistic dictatorship. This was common. The only democracy left in Eastern Europe was Czechoslovakia, which, of course, the other authoritarian regimes would help carve up in 1938. Alexander I, the guy that created the name Yugoslavia as the official name, was assassinated in 1934, and this guy, you can already see there's a problem. His cousin became regent because the son of the king was too young to rule. His name was Paul. And Paul, as regent, when the Second World War broke out, as you can see here, had become quite cozy with the Axis powers. He overplayed his hand. He pledged to sign on to the Axis in 1941. Which doesn't make sense if you know anything about the racial policies of Nazi Germany and their view of Slavic peoples, but others have done it too, including the Bulgarians. And he asked for a little too much, and not only did he not get what he wanted to get from Hitler, but he really pissed off his Air Force and his army, who overthrew him in a coup, literally the day before he was supposed to sign the alliance. And the coup plotters now made this kid into the new king, Peter II.
Young king.
And very young king. And the Americans, and especially the British, now encouraged this young king and the new rulers to resist the Axis powers. Oh, we'll help you, they said. How the Americans thought they were going to do anything is really sort of fascinating. A guy named Donovan, who later becomes the head of the OSS and the CIA, promised American assistance to the Yugoslavians if they found themselves in trouble. We weren't even in the war yet. And that's sort of interesting. The British were even less capable, even though they were in the war. And so when the Germans decided to resolve this, it took 9 days for them to overrun all of Yugoslavia. And then they found no shortage of collaborators. This is the partition of Yugoslavia during this period of time. Peter went into exile, never really was king. Okay. Here you can see a great deal of Yugoslavia came under direct German occupation or Italian occupation. This thing in the middle is the independent state of Croatia. It was run by a notorious outfit called the Ustasha. And the Ustasha were a pro-Nazi fascist organization, which is to distinguish them from other kinds of fascist organizations that were more Italian and less racially oriented and less vicious. The Ustasha were so vicious in their systematic execution of Bosnian Serbs and Jews that even the SS complained of the atrocities during this period of time. A resistance movement developed in Yugoslavia. The Chetniks were a mainly Serbian nationalist outfit, which wasn't going to work in the long run because most Yugoslavians were not Serbians. And returning to the status quo was not something that anti-fascist elements in Yugoslavia were willing to do. So the guy who comes to the fore is this fellow, Josip Broz Tito, who became the commander of what was called the partisan resistance movement. He was also the chairman of the Central Committee of the Yugoslav Communist Party. He himself was a Croatian. His father was Croatian, his mother was Serb. He sort of symbolized what they were trying to accomplish, actually, at the time. Much more successful at building a resistance movement that was, however, basically communist in its core. Very successful in terms of actually tying down German troops. What color is that?
Pink.
Pink territories are the territories that by 1943-44 the partisans actually controlled. The Axis forces only controlled the cities. They were tying down 200,000 German troops when the Germans were fighting for their lives in Stalingrad. very effective, perhaps the most effective resistance movement in all of Europe. And so the Western Allies, the British and the Americans, shifted their support to Tito because they were actually fighting the Nazis, whereas the Chetniks, in their games they were playing as Serbian nationalists, were often cutting deals with local Italian officials, local Germans, and that sort of thing. A kind of civil war was also going on between the Chetniks and the partisans during this period of time, which is unusual. Greece was having the same issue with its resistance movements as well. Ultimately, of course, the war swept through the Balkans. The Soviet army played a minor role in helping to liberate Belgrade. This is their troops marching through. It was partisan troops that succeeded in liberating their capital, led by Tito, and that is why post-war Yugoslavia was led by Tito. The Federated Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia, which existed until 1991. I will point out to you, however, Tito was anti-Stalin. They broke with one another in 1948. He did not sign on to the Soviet alliance, the Warsaw Pact. Even his communism was different. Anybody could come and go if they wanted. There was no wall. Germany filled up with Yugoslavian workers in their factories during this time. They were replaced by Turks. Yugoslav communism involved employee-owned factories, as opposed to state-owned factories. It was a very different model, very decentralized. And the very model of the republic was to emphasize the ethnic dignity of each group and to avoid Serbian nationalism, which really pissed off the Serbs during this period of time. All of that fell apart. But not immediately. Tito died in 1980. And a collective leadership took over until 1991. It just didn't work.
Was it only because he died? I mean, was it already moving in that direction, or was he still able to hold it together?
He held it together pretty well, and I wrestle with this. I'm generally not a person who speaks well of authoritarians. When I look at the Balkans and I try to figure out who did a good job, it usually isn't the ones who drive democracy. And I hate saying that. Frankly, the Turks do.
Tito.
And Tito in Yugoslavia kept them from killing each other.
Yeah.
He also modernized Yugoslavia. I mean, we all remember the Yugo, and we go. But seriously, the fact that Yugoslavia was producing automobiles was the amazing headline at the time. They were producing food. They were literate. I mean, the education programs that he launched were phenomenal throughout Yugoslavia.
And it was a popular tourist destination.
And it really was. I went to
for Westerners, too.
I went to Sarajevo in 1988, and I was just amazed at that diversity and a kind of prosperity. I had spent a lot of time in the Soviet Union. I'd been in East Germany for 6 months. I'd gone through Czechoslovakia. When I got to Yugoslavia, there was a prosperity. And people could come and go. And they did. Now, if you caused a problem for Tito, you went to prison. Milovan Djilas found that out, the guy who wrote the book The New Class, complaining about how communist systems created a new bureaucratic ruling class. But the fact that he even wrote the book was interesting. I didn't know what to do with the Civil War, except I found this. There were lots of wars. And this is the map that shows us the shift from 1990 to 2015. We now have all these independent republics, but I want to point out something to you. The other thing that happened in aspects of the Civil War, particularly in Bosnia and Croatia, is ethnic cleansing. You'll notice here there are Serbs living in Dalmatia. There are not anymore, hardly any. Driven out, okay? And of course, Bosnia is an interesting collection of people. Large numbers of people were killed as part of the cleansing, or part of the purpose of the killing in mass rapes was to cause the mass exodus of people into different places.
What's that down on the current, the contemporary one in Macedonia? What's down there? That's on the right? What is that?
Macedonia, okay, this is they are now calling themselves North Macedonia. The Greeks were really pissed
Oh,
off
that's
that they call
right.
themselves
That's right.
Macedonians, and then they have to
That's
call
right.
themselves the former Yugoslav Republic of
Right.
Macedonia. And
Yeah.
that's not even a good acronym. Macedonians are basically Bulgarians.
Okay.
That color is them, okay? But they also have, those are Albanians. Kosovars are Albanians, okay? They speak Albanian. And Kosovo, of course, got its independence as when Bill Clinton launched the bombing campaigns against Serbia because of the atrocities by the Serbs against the Kosovars. Macedon is a chiefly Slavic nation that speaks a dialect of Bulgarian. There are no, even in the part of Greece that's called Macedonia, there are no Greeks there that can say they descend from ancient Macedonians. First of all, the ancient Greeks didn't think the Macedonians were Greeks. Secondly, the Romans enslaved or killed nearly every man, woman, and child in Macedonia at the end of the Fourth Macedonian War, way, way, way back. If you want to look for the bloodline of real ancient Macedonians, I'm afraid you have to go to Spain, because that's where most of them were sent as slaves. We did Spain a few years ago, remember?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. Yeah.
You remembered that, didn't you?
Definitely, yes.
And you can see Montenegro is now also independent. That was the last of the former Yugoslav republics to break away. So, to end on a positive note, at least I think it's a positive note, not sure for Brexit.
Right, for Brexit.
Slovenia joined the European Union in 2004, which brought them back into economic contact with the peoples with whom they worked for 1,000 years. Okay. That's the beauty of the European Union. It restores these economic ties that the First World War and the Treaty of Versailles had destroyed. Croatia joined in 2013. She had a hard time getting in. She had some issues with regard to whether or not her government was sufficiently democratic. I think she still has issues that concern me with regard to the nature of their government. The other thing we see is Slovenia joined the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in 2004, and then Croatia joined in 2008. You'll notice Macedon, now Northern Macedonia, is promised membership. They had to resolve the name issue before, because the Greeks were vetoing it. Yeah. Notice though that Serbia and Bosnia are not members. Serbia has very serious problems with regard to the nature of their regime. Nobody really quite can understand what Bosnia is doing. But what this means is Dalmatia is now back in contact with Italy, unless Prime Minister Salvini pulls them out after his elections here in a few months. So the economics of the Adriatic that we started this story out with are back with us. The problem is that well, I don't know if it's a problem or not, but the reality is that Dalmatia is no longer the diverse place it used to be.
Yeah.
Fewer than 2% of the population speak Italian now, whereas a third spoke Italian at the beginning of the 20th century. There's been a kind of ethnic cleansing too. Well, not unlike what happened with the Greeks living in Anatolia when the Turks broke them out after the First World War. People have been there thousands of years. I'm sorry.
Oh.
I think I heard 10 wars that I had never heard of before.
Really?
At least.
I think I went to Dubrovnik back in 1988, and that was probably the most fascinating place.
I was there in 1970.
Were you?
Yeah.
Really?
And I still remember going, I went to what was then Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
I went to Hungary in 1970. Very difficult to get in. I mean, visas,
Oh,
border
yeah.
things. In Czechoslovakia, there, a rim of Russian soldiers.
They were still there from
Oh,
68,
yeah.
right.
But Yugoslavia, back and forth,
Oh, yeah.
easy,
Right.
beaches beautiful, no problem.
Right.
And very, very safe, no sense of, paranoia like you'd have
Right.
in Hungary or Czechoslovakia.
Well, Czechoslovakia was in really bad shape.
Very bad shape, yeah.
Very bad shape.
So anyway, yeah, it was pretty exciting to see that then.
Great in 1988.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
were pretty Stalinistic.
And just want